it's urgent that we respond now.
Yeah.
Because without Christ, Pastor Joe, there is a hopeless end.
Yeah.
But with Christ, there's an endless hope.
Yes. Wow, so great to have you here today joining us for this podcast. I have my dear friend Canon J.John here from England. It's so great to see you, John. I'm so happy that you're here. Been waiting for this moment to get you right here on this podcast. So thank you for joining me today.
Pastor Joe, always a delight to see you, and Pastor Nancy. And it's great to be on your podcast. Thank you.
You know, John, you're one of the great storytellers in the world. You love telling stories. You have so many humorous stories and so many things that God has done through your ministry, and just some of the stories and things that you've collected over the years are just absolutely amazing. And so I thought for this podcast, you and I talked a little bit. Why don't we tell some of those stories?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you want to start today?
All right. Well, why don't I start by, why don't we tell some angel stories?
Yes. You know, I was watching your podcast earlier in the week on angels.
Yes.
And I was so intrigued, really, by this lady who's written this book on angels, because I think in the heart of all of us, we all want to, believe that angels exist, even though none of us have really, most of us have never seen one. And two, I think there's a hunger in us to touch eternity. These are eternal beings, and we sort of want to connect eternally with something. But let's talk a little bit about them, angels.
Absolutely. Well, I believe there are angels in heaven. I believe that God does send angels to guide, and of course, the Gospels,
Yes.
retelling the story of Jesus' birth, is full of angelic appearances.
Yeah.
But my cousin, Costa, he was in hospital, and he was suffering from leukemia, and he had to have regular blood transfusions, like every 2 weeks. The doctor wanted him in for some tests, and he was in the hospital. And my cousin told me this because he was telling me this to ask me what did I think. And he said to me that he was in the hospital room at night, and it was about 3:00 in the morning. And this lady walked in, and he said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I'm the cleaner." So he thought, oh, okay, she's the cleaner. And then she put her hand on him, and she said, "Costa, I've come to tell you that all will be well and you don't have cancer." Anyway, then she left. The next day, the consultant doctor comes in, and he says to the doctor, "The cleaner, she came in last night, and she told me that I'm okay." And the doctor, he laughed like you're laughing now, Pastor Joe. And he said, no, there is no way that a cleaner would come into the hospital. They don't clean at night.
Yeah.
And no one would be allowed in. But he said, no, she says, I'm going to be okay. Anyway, the doctor said, "Look, Costa, you are on a lot of medication, and some of the medication that you're on makes you to hallucinate." So that's what the doctor said. At the end of the day, the doctor comes back having done all the tests. He says, "I don't know how to tell you this, Costa, but you don't have cancer."
Wow.
He'd been going to the hospital for 2 years.
2 years for chemo treatment.
Yeah, and blood transfusions and everything like that.
Wow.
And so Costa's going, "What do you think, John? What do you think?" I said, "Costa, that was an angelic visitation."
Absolutely. Did he have any idea of what prompted that, or in other words, I would love to be able to marshal some angelic help from time to time, but that's the hard part about how do you get the cleaning lady to come see you?
I know. Well, do you know, when I heard that story, it really inspired me, Pastor Joe, because it made me feel like, oh, actually, why don't I ask the Lord
Yeah.
to either send me an angel or to send some other people I know
Yeah.
who need angels,
Yeah.
who need an angelic visitation.
Yeah.
And I have now a greater expectancy. And I think maybe we don't have an expectancy for
Yeah.
them to visit us.
That's it. We don't really have a faith that A, that they exist, and B, that they're ministering spirits to serve and minister to the saints, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, there are 300 or so verses in the New Testament that deal with angels.
Yes.
So this is not an abstract thought or an abstract. This is something that was very, very common in New Testament times. Book of Acts, you see a lot of angelic activity. And absolutely, the Gospels are just full of angels.
Full of them.
Yes.
Can I tell you my favorite story?
Yes.
One of my favorite stories. So this African missionary returned to Scotland to his sending church in order to recruit more people to go out to the mission field in Africa.
Mm.
It's a very cold, wet night. He arrives at the church and he's a little bit disheartened when he walks in. There's a number of people there, and he's thrilled that they're there, but everyone is elderly. And he thinks, it's great they've come, but they're not suitable for the mission field. But he still feels prompted to give the same message that he'd prepared. And he ends his message, which explains the needs in Africa. And he ends the message by saying, "Who will go? Who will go? Who will go?" Now, he didn't know that the organist who was playing the organ for the hymns that they sang had a young boy was helping the organist. It was called the billows, putting air into the organ. And the young boy stood up and said, "I will go. I will go. I will go." Now, that young boy's name was David Livingstone.
Wow.
He was then advised, well, look, David, if God has spoken to you about going to Africa, when you grow up, what you should do is become a medical doctor, because that would be very good if you go to Africa as a medical missionary. He does become a doctor. He does go to Africa. He's trying to reach different people groups. And there's one particular people group that they're trying to reach. And the chief gets very offended. And he sends David a message. And the message read, now, by the way, we know all of this because it was all written in David Livingstone's diary. Yeah. So he sends him a message that we're going to come tonight to your compound and we're going to murder you all. And David Livingstone writes in his journal and in his diary, Lord, and there's a slight fear about the way he writes. Mm-hmm. Lord, will our work be extinguished after all these decades? Lord, we need your aid. We need your help. We need your protection. Anyway, they didn't come and they didn't murder them.
Wow.
Years later, they reached that particular people group and the chief comes to know Christ. And David Livingstone says to the chief, "You sent me a message that you were going to come and murder us." He said, yes, but you didn't come. He says, "Yes, we did come. We all came to murder you, but surrounding your entire compound were 39 giants."
Wow.
When we saw the giants, we ran away. Now note the number, 39.
Wow.
A couple of years later, David Livingstone goes back to Scotland to his sending church to report on the work. He tells that story. At the end of the meeting, the secretary of the church goes up to David Livingstone and says, "Dr. Livingstone, do you remember the date that they were going to come and murder you?" He says, "Of course I know that date." He gives him the date. The secretary opens the diary to that date, he said, "Look, Dr. Livingston, there were 39 people in the church praying for them."
Wow. Wow.
39 people in Scotland,
Wow.
of course, who didn't know this story, didn't know that they were going to
That's
be
right.
attacked. And there were 39 angels
Wow.
surrounding the compound.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. And that story not only speaks of the angelic intervention, but it also speaks of the providential power of God, that God is ever present, and that he has a plan and a purpose that sort of goes beyond our thinking or our ability to understand it at times.
Absolutely.
Of course, David Livingston went to bed that night fearful, and but woke up the next morning alive, and so because during the night God's providential hand moved.
Yes.
And earlier today, when we were at breakfast, we were talking about the providence of God, and you had a great story on that.
Yeah. We heard this talk, Pastor Joe, and Killy and I were quite stirred about that expression, the providence of God, which means the sovereignty of God.
Mhm.
That God isn't surprised by anything, and that God reigns and rules. And when my friend Andy visited us at Christmas, I said to Andy, Killy and I have been talking about the sovereignty of God. And so we start talking with him about the sovereignty of God. And, what do you think it means, Andy? And he said, this is what he said. This is how he explained the sovereignty of God. He's Greek Cypriot like I am. And he and his family lived in Cyprus. But then his parents decided that they would move to England.
Mhm.
And when they moved to England, because Andy's English wasn't very good, because he was a Greek speaker, he was put in the bottom class. And it was a difficult environment to kind of progress. Years later, his parents went for a teacher's consultation. And the teacher told the parents that Andy was not going to take any exams because he was in a class that didn't progress educationally.
Yeah.
And so the parents were furious. They went to see the headmaster, and the headmaster said, "There's only one solution. He retakes the year, but we put him in a stream where he can take exams. Because, of course, if you don't take those first exams, you can't take the second exams. You can't ever go to college or university." And Andy was telling us that he was crying and he was saying to his father, "This is so embarrassing."
Yeah.
Normally you get put back a year when you're very young, not when you're 14.
Yeah.
But anyway, he turns up in the classroom. The teacher says there's only one spare desk. You got to sit at the front. And he sat next to a guy called Kevin Lambert. Andy was not a Christian. Kevin wasn't a Christian. During the summer term, Kevin invited Andy to go on a Christian camp along with Kevin's brother, Neil. So Andy thought, well, I don't know what that means, but I'll go.
Right.
Andy, Kevin, Neil all go to the camp and they all become Christians.
Wow.
All three of them become Christians. A couple of years later, Andy passes all of his exams. He goes to college. I go to college. Because he's been put back a year, he and I are in the same year.
Class.
So he brings me to Christ.
Wow.
So Andy was saying he was pulled back a year so that he could meet Kevin to go to a camp to meet Jesus, so that he would end up being in the same year as me to bring me to Christ. That's called the providence of God.
That's an amazing story. Just an amazing story. And all of us, I think, can look back and see decisions that we made. We can see consequences of our actions, some good, some not so good. And if you live long enough, you find out how each one of those were a piece of the jigsaw puzzle of our life, the mosaic of our life.
Absolutely.
And that to me is the providence of God,
Yes.
that he takes the broken pieces of our life and somehow puts them together into a mosaic that create a masterpiece. And that's certainly true for you and for
Yes.
me too. I mean,
Yes.
for me, I had, when I moved to Dallas, I moved just for the summer. I never been to Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Tennessee. I was in school and graduated from Mississippi, University of Mississippi, and I was headed to law school. And so I came just for the summer, just to be here during the summer of my life. And it was here that really the Lord, this is where God wanted me. And but I never would have come had I not had God's providential hand come into my life to
Absolutely.
bring me here.
And he
And
works it, doesn't he, Pastor
yes,
Joe? He works it all for good.
yeah,
And it doesn't say everything is good,
right,
but he can work everything for good.
yeah, yeah. And I think, might be listening today, some people might be listening, you may be in a wilderness at this moment. You may feel like your life is full of just those broken pieces. But if you will just take another step forward, God will meet you.
Absolutely.
And how he does it is a mystery. But it's true. He's like that father, that providential father who's on the front porch of eternity looking for the prodigal to come home. And so all of us at one stage of our life or another are prodigal.
Yes.
We've been away from God, and he wants us to come back into the family.
Amen.
As you said earlier in this podcast, he runs to greet us.
He does.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. One of the stories you told years ago that I was particularly attracted to is the story of your neighbor lady,
Yes.
who had a stroke.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about them, because you had a relationship with she and her husband, right?
Oh, yes. Killy and I, our next door neighbors, they called Killy and I the neighbors from heaven.
Yeah.
So, which is really good.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't want to be called the neighbors from the other side.
That's right.
So, and they were not Christians, but we got on very well with them and always would have a little banter with them. Anyway, she had a stroke. As a consequence of the stroke, she fell into a coma, and she was transferred from our local hospital to a very renowned hospital called the John Ratcliffe Hospital in Oxford.
Mm-hmm.
The daughter came round and spoke to Killy and said to Killy, we've just met with the doctors, and the doctors said that mum has no brain activity and she's on a life support machine, and we've decided that we're going to turn off the life support machine after 5 days, so she dies.
Now let's give some context. She's in one of the top hospitals in the world.
Yes.
Right? A teaching hospital.
Yes.
Right there.
At Oxford University.
At Oxford University. Top hospitals in the world. And she's had this massive stroke.
Yes.
And there's been no blood supply to her brain.
No.
And so the kids are preparing now for, we're going to give it 5 days on life support, and then we're going to pull the plug.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So they thought 5 days so that all the grandchildren could visit.
Yeah.
And then she can die. So Killy said, can we visit her? And the daughter said, please, would you visit her? Because my mother was so fond of you two. And the only day I could go was the 5th day. So we're now driving to Oxford. Now, here's my confession, Pastor Joe.
This is the part I love.
I want to confess. I was in a bad mood.
Yes.
And, I want to share this aspect of the story to show my humanity.
Yes.
I was like, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
She was in the local hospital, 10 minutes away.
Yeah.
Now we've got to drive an hour.
Yeah.
And you know what it's like when you drive to another hospital, you don't know where to park your car. Right. You don't know where to get the ticket for your car. Yeah. You don't know anyway, it's all stressful. Yeah. So I'm in a bit of a bad mood. We arrive she's in intensive care. You call it here in America, what's intensive care?
Yeah, I mean,
It's like the high dependency ward.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we get there and we go into this room. She's in this private room. And Killy and I say, "Hello, Joyce." Killy's going, "Be quiet." I said, "Hello, Joyce." I said, "It's the neighbors from heaven." I said, "We've come to see you. We've come to pray with you." And I thought, well, maybe I'll just anoint her with oil, kind of give her the last rites and
Yes.
let her die.
And you're talking to her with that joy, that
Oh, yes.
elevated pitch, because not for her, it's for the people around her. I mean,
Just
she's
talking.
gone.
Yeah. So
Right?
just
Yeah.
that's it. Just,
Yeah.
So I said, "Look, Joyce, what we'll do is that we'll pray."
Mm.
So she had tubes everywhere. So I managed to get hold of her hand. I held Killy's hand, and then Killy held her other hand. And I said, "Joyce, what we'll do now," I said, "Killy and I will pray the Lord's Prayer." So we start praying the Lord's Prayer.
The Matthew 6 Lord's
Yes,
Prayer.
Lord's
Yes.
Prayer.
Yeah.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. And when we said, "Your kingdom come," she woke up.
Whoa.
She woke up. I mean, it was a
Whoa.
little bit scary.
Whoa.
And it was like, "Whoa," and then she just woke up. And so we went back home. I went straight to see her husband. And I said, "Alec," I said, "Joyce woke up." He said, "Don't joke about these things." Because he and I always had a banter.
Mm.
I said, "Alec, I would never joke about this sort of thing." I said, "But she woke up." He goes, "No, she didn't." I said, "She did." He goes, "No, she didn't." Anyway, she came home 10 days later.
Wow. Wow.
Now, look, Pastor Joe, we live in a world of miracle and mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've got to hold those two things together.
Mm-hmm.
I prayed for another person that comes to my mind called Johnny Sadassi. And he died. And he was only 32.
Mm.
And Joyce, an elderly woman,
Mm-hmm.
wakes up from a coma with no brain activity.
Mm.
And again, this is where you trust and believe in the providence of God.
Yes.
But her time was not over.
Yeah. And I think that is the explanation of, because I've prayed for people and they passed.
Yeah.
I've believed and had my faith up for people and they didn't get healed. And so, but what you just said, I think, is a real key here. It wasn't their time.
Absolutely.
God has a time for every one of us, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah.
He does. Do you know, a friend of mine, he's a pastor. He went to visit this dying person and he held the person by the hand and said to the person, "Do you think you're ready to go to meet the Lord, or do you feel God still wants you here on earth?"
Mm.
And the person said, "It's time for me to go."
Yeah.
And the moment they said, "It's time for me to go," they died.
Yeah. Wow.
And he said, he asks people that question. And when they say, "It's not my time to go," he says, "I will pray and plead and support them
Yeah.
that their life will be preserved."
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a real truth in that, in the sense that I think, people get that close to the line of passing from this life into the next. I think and I know that I have been involved helping people make that next step, knowing it was their time, praying with them, and taking the fear, or trying to remove the fear from their life so they can move from this life into the next.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found is just reassure them. Hey, God is going to take care of your wife, or God's going to take care of your kids, or you don't have to worry about what you're leaving behind. The Lord's working in their life. You can go at peace. And I've prayed for several people. It was their time. It was their motive, but they were afraid. They were fearful. They, and that's a great moment right there to pray with them to receive Christ for those who've never received the Lord, and secondly to reassure them that the next step is an eternal step, but Jesus is going to be there waiting on you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there's for me, there's also the great tragedy of people getting to that level and still not wanting Christ.
Yes.
Stubbornly hanging on to their belief that there is no God, and that's a sad place.
It is
to be.
It is.
But it is a reality of some people, and so I would hope that those people that are listening at this moment, would always know that God, it's never too late to come to Christ. It's never too late.
No. And it's urgent that we respond now.
Yeah.
Because without Christ, Pastor Joe, there is a hopeless end.
Yeah.
But with Christ, there's an endless hope.
Yes.
And we need to respond now.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Well, as we kind of wind up our time today, one of the things that I've observed about your ministry and life is how amazingly you can wrap these great truths of God's love in humor. You can wrap them in kindness. You make yourself real to people when you do that. When did you start? When did you learn that? When did you start? You're a collector of funny stories, and I just love to hear that. Some of them I've heard now 4, 5, 6, 7 times. I still laugh. My favorite one is the cat story. It's my favorite story. It's amazing. When did you learn to do that? How did you learn to do that?
Well, do you know, Pastor Joe, when we read the Gospels, I think we don't always appreciate and see and understand Hebrew humor.
Mm-hmm.
Hebrew humor is humor by exaggeration.
Yeah.
So when Jesus says, "Oh, boys," he says to the disciples, "Hey, boys, before you take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the telegraph pole out of your own eye." It's like, "Oh, Lord, that was a good one."
Yeah.
Do you see? I actually do think Jesus was very funny and very humorous.
Yeah.
And really, I think the important thing, Pastor Joe, is to be yourself.
Yeah.
Don't try and be someone you're not.
Right.
Look, and we all like a bit of humor.
Yes.
We all like a bit of a laugh. And, there are some tablets, like headache tablets, that we wouldn't be able to swallow. But the only reason we can swallow them is because the ingredient that we need for our headache or whatever it is coated in sugar.
Yes.
So I think sometimes it's good to be able to present truth in a way that will make it soluble and digestible.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not a comedian, but there's no reason why we can't help people understand the truths of God in a light-hearted way without in any way diluting the seriousness of the message.
And you are a master and a great example for all of us. And I'm so grateful for that. This weekend, you're going to be here with us. I'm excited about that. And you're going to be talking to us about personal evangelism and about evangelism in general. Give us a preview of what you're going to be talking about.
Okay. The thing is, if you had to sum up, say, the New Testament in one line, what would it be? One sentence. Well, it would be a sentence that I will extract from the Apostle Paul. Yeah. To know Christ and to make him known.
Yeah.
Again, it's like a coin. One side, to know Christ. The second side, to make him known. So I will appeal to people who don't yet know Christ to know Christ.
Mm.
But for those of us that know Christ, make him known.
Yes.
Make him known.
Yes.
And become far more intentional
Yes.
in doing both those things.
Mm.
Every day I'm trying to know Christ more and I'm trying to make him known more.
Yes.
And if we all do that more and more and more, the church of Jesus Christ will explode.
And it really is the two sides of one coin, right?
is.
It really is.
It
Knowing him is dependent upon, you want a deeper relationship? Make him known. You make him known, you'll know him deeper.
Yes.
Right?
It
I mean,
is.
and so it's a seesaw. I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think, that's one word that you've said here several times today is being intentional.
It is.
Right.
That's the word, Pastor Joe.
Lord, give me eyes to see people like you see them.
Yeah.
Give me a heart to connect with them like you have that heart.
Yeah.
And, Jesus walked, I'm sure, by many, many sick people. He didn't heal everyone, but he only did what he saw his Father doing. And so it's not just some random act that we're doing. We have an intentionality.
Yes.
And we're paying attention at the same time to what God's saying and showing us.
Exactly.
And it's beautiful when that happens.
And Pastor Joe, I am so grateful that a man called Andy introduced me to Jesus.
Yeah.
If he hadn't introduced me to Jesus, we wouldn't be sitting here today talking about Jesus.
That's it.
But the first person that told me about Jesus,
Yes.
I become a Christian.
Yes. Praise the Lord. And where would we be today had he not done it? And I think that's a great place to leave everybody today. Thank you for joining us. It's been I have so many other questions to ask. We'll save that for a new time. But I want to appreciate all of you who came and listened today by podcast, and just let you know that it's never too late to introduce someone to Jesus. And maybe perhaps today God would use you in a way to share your experience with Christ with someone else. So God bless you, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Canon J.John. We had a great time together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Joe.
God bless you.